Welcome back. Today we have a podcast episode with Aaron, who's been working on reducing his high astigmatism completely unplanned. I didn't intend for these. This is maybe already the third episode where high astigmatism comes into play and is a key part of the discussion as far as reducing your dependence on the cylinder diopters. It was an interesting chat. We were struggling finding our words here and there, but I think it's still instructive on the fact that you can reduce your cylinder dependence and maybe a little bit of inspiration for you if you also have high astigmatism. Enjoy the episode. I'm Aaron Walker. Let's see, about 5 years ago now, I guess, I went to the optometrist and got my eyes checked, and that was actually the last time I ever did that. And the prescription they gave me was, let's see, it was minus 1.75 spherical in the right eye with minus 3.75 astigmatism, and minus 2.5 in the left eye with minus 3.5 astigmatism. And I didn't really have the means to buy glasses at that time, so I just kind of stuck with what I had. And I for a while was kind of looking around, trying to find something to improve my eyesight, because a couple of years before that I got that prescription, my mom told me about when she was young, she had astigmatism, and she didn't really like having astigmatism because she liked wearing contacts, and that kind of messed with her vision with the toric lenses, or the ones that they have to align perfectly for you to see. And she decided to try to improve that, and I think she read a book or something that talked about it. And what she did essentially was she went outside and jumped on a trampoline up and down, looking at a faraway steeple, and she'd look at it and just trying to make it into one. I think her astigmatism was horizontal, so she saw it double this way. I see double vertically. So she did that, and after a while she noticed she could fuse the images together and hold it for longer and longer periods of time, and it worked. Eventually her astigmatism was gone, and she got just regular contacts without the astigmatism. And so from that story, I knew it had to be possible, but I tried similar things with no success. But through searching, trying to get rid of astigmatism, especially because it was so high, that's kind of where I came across Endmyopia. And did you notice your astigmatism? Is it something that you had context of? Did you get double images somewhere? Was there any discomfort? How would you identify what the optometrist saw as your cylinder?
I'm not sure. Now I can kind of identify it. Say at nighttime, if you're looking at a shining light, the sort of the bokeh effect, because it's out of focus. Normally, if you don't have astigmatism, it would be spherical, right? But with mine, it was this football shape that and whenever I'd look at, say, text in a book or something, I'd see sort of a more solid line of text, and below that I'd see the same line of text almost half an inch below it, and just all these
And that's always been that way?
Not always. No, that wasn't where I started with glasses. I don't think I had astigmatism when I started, of course. I think I found my first pair of glasses some years ago and tried them on. It barely did anything.
And so I don't think there was any astigmatism correction in there.
Okay. And you said you went to the optometrist 5 years ago and you had that high astigmatism. So you're wearing glasses before that?
Yeah.
How did that work? Okay. So I'm confused about that. Okay. So you went to the optometrist 5 years ago, and then how did you end up in glasses in the first place? That was longer ago
Oh,
than.
sorry. So like I got glasses probably around when I was around 10, I think,
Mhm.
and just growing up with my parents and going to the optometrist every so often to get stronger and stronger lenses. So like I didn't start with that prescription and with the high astigmatism.
Got it. That makes more sense. And where are you at currently after all this time?
Right now, um, well, in good lighting outside when it's around noonish with when the sun's highest. With my glasses, I can see basically 20/20. I would say with -1 in both eyes and just spherical.
Just spherical, no more cylinder. And how long did that take?
It took, well, up until this point, basically.
So
um,
5 years.
yeah, like the first, I'd say, like the first 4 years were just really, really slow going. Like there were improvements, I would say, but like I'd improve and then think, well, I want to keep that ball rolling, and so I'd get like a new pair of glasses that were just a little weaker, and sometimes I'd think I like overdid that, and because it was just kind of like stagnate for a while. It was just like tiny improvements, but I think I was able to get down to around -2 diopters of cylinder for the astigmatism. And it was funny. So I just have to mention this. The first pair of glasses that I bought, like the first normalized I bought after like learning about the Endmyopia method, was probably way too much of a reduction. It was, I brought it down to -1.5 in spherical for both eyes. So I equalized it for both the eyes and brought the astigmatism down to -1.75. And so I'm not quite sure what my reasoning was for that, like just kind of trying to play around with the math. There's like, like people say you can take out like -1 diopter of astigmatism if you replace it with uh, a half a diopter of spherical to sort of compensate for that. So I think that's kind of what I was thinking with that, I guess. But it's funny because I kind of set those glasses aside after a while because they weren't working. But after improving to like -2 in the astigmatism, I was able to bring those glasses out again, and they worked great.
And how did you go about the astigmatism reductions once you kind of got a handle on it? Like how often did you reduce the cylinder, and what did you do to the spherical, if anything, and what were the time gaps between the reductions?
That's a good question. I wish I would have kind of journaled out a little more in detail, like how long it was between all those things, because that would be useful. But I think it would probably be a couple of months at least between reductions. And each time I'd reduce the astigmatism by about zero point 0.5 for each pair of glasses. Usually I'd buy 2 pairs of glasses at a time, like both in reductions of minus zero point 0.5, just so I'd have sort of a normalized one and a differential. Um, I did that because I thought I read somewhere that like keeping the spherical higher if you have like higher astigmatism. Like if you kind of leave that untouched and you just lower the astigmatism or the cylinder over time, then and then you can work on the spherical later after you deal with the astigmatism. But like what I found was that um, when I did that, or if I even tried to replace any of the cylinder with spherical, it would make it harder to focus to like get active focus or um, like for instance if I'm walking around at night and I look at a stoplight and I've got like way too much spherical correction for that, it like it would, sorry, I'm kind of rambling on a
No, that's fine. But do you think, okay, here's another question. Knowing what you know now, how hard would you say is it to go from trusting the optometrist to do all this stuff for you versus you making your own lens corrections? And the reason I'm asking that is because you're obviously super aware of what cylinders do to your eyes and what spherical does to your eyes and how lighting affects those things. Like you, as I'm listening to you, I'm like, okay, nobody needs to tell you what you need because you can pick your own, right? Like you know what you
yeah.
need. How much of a journey would you say is it? Like if I'm just a random guy and I have high cylinder, I'm asking you, hey, how hard is it to learn all this stuff? What would you say? Like what's the learning curve like to figure all this out?
Well, um, I won't say it's too steep. Uh, I I got a test lens kit kind of early on, just because I heard people say that was useful when you have kind of a little more complex prescriptions. And just kind of with fiddling with that, I was able to figure out my prescription pretty easily. It wasn't like super complicated. Um, is that kind of what you were
Yeah,
referring
like
to?
because that's kind of, and I guess it's kind of a leading question because I think especially if you have a test lens kit, right? Like in a matter of days, you can figure out, and days being generous, right? Like you put in cylinder and you see, wow, this is what that does, and you put in spherical and you go, okay, that's pretty clear.
Mm-hmm.
Does it seem okay? Maybe in a different way. Does it seem? Does it seem like silly almost that you would have to go to an optometrist to do this stuff, or is it counterproductive maybe even to not empower yourself to go, okay, I need to figure out what these glasses do to my eyes?
Yeah, like kind of looking at it now, like the I guess going to an optometrist to have my eyesight measured, like it seemed to it, back then it seemed to be like this sort of mystical thing, of course, but now it's just like anyone could do this if they like say had a test lens kit or borrowed one. Like, oh, sorry.
It's all
That's
right, no worries, no worries. I found this especially interesting just because of the high astigmatism, and we just had a few conversations now. Like this whole podcast style thing is still new, but oddly enough, there is two, I want to say three cases now where the astigmatism was over two diopters, which I always say is pretty unusual. But it's still interesting because that's one that people a lot of times say you just can't fix it, or it's too complicated, it's too difficult. And I'm always saying, okay, especially with a test lens kit, it's super simple to figure out, right? And once you have a good handle on like that, how much do you actually need to where you have a little bit of challenge, but it's not distracting or uncomfortable, and then just taking whatever time it takes to where you no longer notice that and then reduce it again is a super simple thing to do, especially once you get over that little hump. And
yeah.
I guess it's almost like, right, like a lawyer in court going, so would you say that? But really what I'm curious about, if I am accurate in saying that you really don't need somebody else to tell you how to do this, and
when you do it yourself, you gain a much better understanding of what you need, and then you can also affect the outcome over time.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
See, everybody, Aaron completely agrees with this. Would you say? No, but okay, so now with the -1 and no cylinder, you said like in the middle of the day in good lighting, you don't notice any kind of double vision directional blur or anything anymore. How is it in lower lighting conditions?
Lower lighting conditions, it's weird. Like, we live in a basement with like tiny windows, so we barely get any natural sunlight at all. So like right now, it's just kind of crappy house lighting. In that lighting, it's like sometimes it seems like there hasn't been any improvement at all. Like sometimes I can kind of get it to focus a little bit more than I used to, but it, I really notice the most improvements like outside. And like I guess I wouldn't say there aren't like any artifacts at all, like a complete lack of double vision, but it's, let's say the spread is a lot more condensed to where I can resolve the images a lot easier now. So like I would say I'm still like working with these are the -1s, but like it's a noticeable improvement over like say prescriptions I've had in the past where it like I don't know.
So in when you are in lower lighting conditions, do you wear glasses with higher cylinders still then?
Inside generally I don't really wear glasses, like unless we're like watching a movie or playing a game or something. What I noticed is if I try to put on any kind of spherical or just any correction indoors, it I don't know, it just doesn't work quite as well. Kind of like what I was trying to say before was when I have too much spherical correction, um, like let's say you have this blur and you put on these glasses and it reduces that. Well, if you have it to where you've got like too much spherical and it's almost reducing it, like say this is the bubble and like these edges cross paths, and so it's like I don't know if that's making sense. Like I don't
So
know, I just found
so it's just not productive to wear any correction at that point, basically.
yeah.
It's not improving the image, it's just changing it in a way that's still not working for you.
Yeah,
Right?
that's kind of what I found, at least.
So then what do you do? Is it in these lower lighting conditions, is it then uncomfortable or counterproductive? Like, is that what you're saying about text before? You still get those double lines, or how does that manifest itself when the lighting isn't that great?
Yeah, it like right now, like I'm looking at some text in my email, and especially if it's a white text against a background, that's a lot more noticeable. But I can read it at this point. Like even though I see a lot of the different artifacts, it's like the double vision, like the one, the parts of the double vision that I know aren't real, the those ones are slowly fading to where I think it's. Uh,
I understand. I know why you're hesitating. Okay, so for everybody who's listening, who's like, why is Aaron just not explaining this well? Is because it's something that you visually experience that in general you don't spend any time trying to explain with words, and there aren't really any great words to explain how your vision gets distorted with astigmatism. Yeah. So as you're not used to like explaining this.
Mm-hmm. I lost you.
See me?
Yeah.
So you know what the experience feels like, and you're just going through your days, and you're like, okay, so this additional blur that's happening on a side of parts of the image is fading, but you're not used to explaining that to anybody. So as I'm asking you, you're realizing, wow, well, how do I explain this?
Yeah.
So the hesitation is totally normal, because, for example, like I speak German and French, a couple other languages where I'm not used to expressing these ideas. And I find that I don't have the words for it, because it's something you just experience visually, but you don't contemplate, right? Or you don't really discuss with people. So it's totally cool. And actually, I'm surprised that in the past discussions, the few discussions we've had, this hasn't happened more often. Because you kind of have to collect, like, how do I put this? How do I describe this weirdness that's going on? I totally get it. It's totally fine. But is it, so basically in a simpler way, like, is it still distracting, or is it something that is easily enough manageable to where you don't mind not correcting the astigmatism?
Yeah, like, it depends on the situation. Like, if I'm at home just by myself on my computer, I can bump up the brightness enough to where I can see things better. But I'm going to a university right now, and in one of my classes, the projector is kind of dim and the lighting in the room is horrible, and I'm like pretty far away from the projector. So like in those situations, it becomes really uncomfortable, and like I have to put on my glasses, and even then I can't quite see it perfectly, but I get by. But yeah, it's definitely not great indoors.
Yeah. And those are the -1 glasses with the no cylinder, or what are you using there?
Yeah, that's the -1. Once I move on to another pair of glasses and I'm able to see really well outside, I kind of just put the other ones away, just so I guess don't get tempted, but maybe that's not the best solution.
So what would you say, like, do you know at this point, like, how much cylinder correction you need for that the double image to go away almost completely? Like, if you're looking back through your previous glasses, have you ever tried that to go, okay, if the lighting's not great, how much cylinder correction do I still need to get rid of most of that?
Yeah, I haven't really tried it too much for indoor stuff. Outdoor, occasionally I've taken out an old pair of glasses with some astigmatism correction, and it's I don't know, not much like I don't know. Indoors, I haven't really tested it very much, but I think if I were to try to correct it completely, it would look about the same astigmatism. I'd say maybe -2 diopters of cylinder to get that correction. Like it seems like a lot, but like, let's say I take the same text, go outside, and I can resolve it perfectly with the proper lighting. It's just something about the indoors. I don't know if I need to specifically like train for that, or
no, it's always like that. Whenever there's less lighting, any kind of refractive error is going to become more noticeable.
Yeah.
Another thing, I think I'm liking this conversation because it's, and I could be wrong here, okay? I could totally be wrong, but it reminds me of my own journey. And I'm kind of thinking, if somebody asked me these questions, I'd be like, dude, I don't know. Because in your head, you're already realized that this gets better as you reduce your dependence on those corrective lenses, and you're already kind of over it, right?
Yeah.
Like, you don't even want to go back there and dwell on that stuff, because you're like, I'm looking forward, and the way forward is I don't need this stuff. So you worked out how much of it you need when exactly, and when you don't need it, and that's kind of the end of it. Like, you're not trying to go backwards in time and contemplate like the past and the 5 years that you spent getting out of that. So I could see, because I can see your face, and when I think also for people who are listening who are maybe not getting that, I see And again, I could just be projecting, but I'm like, if people asked me that in the past, I would have just been like, I'm already over that, right? Like I'm trying to get rid of these things. I'm not trying to have this cylinder correction. I'm only asking because I'm thinking like somebody who's listening to this who still has high astigmatism, who doesn't have the confidence, right? Who wants to know, is this actually working, or are these guys unicorn farming and wishful thinking? Like, I'm poking at you just to get your experience of where were you at versus where you are now, and like what inspires the confidence, and how can you tell like you really don't need this now where you needed it before? Does that make sense?
Yeah, like I guess first of all, I'd say like the way I've been approaching this, I wouldn't necessarily recommend to anyone else, just because like for one, for a long time it took so long to get any noticeable progression. But yeah, for me, like I'm pretty comfortable at this point with how blurry things tend to get, like in bad lighting. But what I can say is when I am outside, like even right now, it's winter and there's clouds all the time. Even when it's cloudy, I can still see like pretty darn well. When it's sunny and no clouds, that's when I would say I've got pretty crisp 20/20 with my current glasses. And so I feel like I can objectively say that those things have gotten better. It's just when I'm inside, the when I'm inside, the blur or it, the vision isn't quite as noticeably improved. But I have been noticing recently improvements where I can read things a little bit better, especially black text on a white background. But
yeah, and that takes time, and it's actually, it's good if you keep yourself in a space where the challenge is always there, especially with astigmatism, because astigmatism can seemingly take forever to reduce, and you can't really active focus out of it, right? Like with spherical reductions, if you're getting like a little bit more blur challenge, you can do active focus to a fairly interesting degree, whereas with astigmatism, it's more of a patience thing, right? Like the lines are not lining up, and you basically have to wait for your visual cortex to figure out how to deal with this change, right? And your biology to adapt, and it's a much slower process. So I think it requires a lot more patience, and I don't want to say the word faith, because it's definitely, we're not in the faith business, but it does take a little bit of trust in yourself to go, okay, so this doesn't look great, especially in this lighting, but I believe based on my past experience that this is going to continue improving, right? And especially in low light, you get more of the challenge. So it's not a bad thing. Like in a way, being exposed to the low light and having the images not line up perfectly, and then getting into good light and having the images line up perfectly gives you that great contrast, right? Because your visual cortex has that reference of this is what it should be like outdoors. Because what happens when I call things blur adaptation, which doesn't really happen much with astigmatism, when your brain just gets used to something being a certain way, and then nothing ever changes. But right, you go outside and everything's perfect, and then you go inside and the image gets a little bit wonky, your brain will try to fix that, right? So while that can be slightly annoying in indoor conditions that your vision is as perfect, having that is productive in reducing that whole effect.
Yeah. So one thing, I know we're kind of running a little short on time, but one thing I just wanted to mention that I feel like it was kind of an important part, at least in my journey in this, was so I mentioned, I think I might have mentioned in a comment somewhere on YouTube or Facebook that recently, this past year, is where I made like some more substantial improvements that were really noticeable. And what happened, I think, is before that, let's say like 4 years ago, I was kind of stuck on this like plant-based diet that like, you know, trying to get healthy, and I thought it was like the best thing ever. And kind of fast forwarding to now, like over this past year, I've been learning a lot about nutrition, like watching a lot of podcasts. I actually watched the podcast that you were on with HBO podcast with Sean Baker. That was interesting to see.
Sean is an interesting character.
Yeah. But I started learning more about like carnivore type diets, and I thought I'd give it a shot. And so I started doing like a really strict sort of carnivore-ish type diet, cheeks of doing that. Like one day I was walking home from school, and with this was actually with that first normalized pair I bought. It was the minus 1.5 and minus 1.75 for the astigmatism. And I noticed, like, you know, you kind of watch, you look at your landmarks as you go walking around, that familiar things you like to look at. And I noticed that things were a lot sharper and a lot more focused and more condensed. And I just thought that was interesting. And like the next day, it got even better. The next day, it got even better. And suddenly, with that pair of glasses, I was seeing like perfectly 20/20, like the best I could possibly imagine seeing. And so at that point, that's when I kind of knew I could objectively say like I've improved from like my starting prescription. And what I found, well, this experiment, it's kind of been on and off over the year, like haven't been perfect. Of course, there's been Thanksgiving, Christmas, all these things where you just eat whatever the heck you want. And every time that happened, I would notice that my vision would stop improving, and like it would be harder to focus on things. Like there was just more sort of built up strain. And whenever I'd go back to just like cutting out all like carbohydrates and sugar and whatnot, and just eating like a high meat diet essentially, I'd notice those improvements like after a day or two of doing that. And like even now, doing that, just today I was walking around, and like even I like to go on walks without my glasses just because it provides me with a little bit more of a challenge. I think I'm a little more comfortable with blur at this point to where I can do that. But I would say it's hard to say like what is 20/20. Like I can read things that are pretty far away that are like small print, but I know it's not like crisp and it's not perfect, but I can read it. So, but I guess what I'm saying is one of the things that like really kickstarted those improvements over this last year, like for me, was changing diet. I'm not saying like that's how it'll be with everyone. I think, you know, everyone's body is a little bit different in what they need at the time, but like that's what I needed, was to switch it up to eating more meat and less carbohydrates. And I thought that was interesting in one of the podcasts with the guy who had diabetes, and as he was working on that with, I think it was a low carb diet, and sort of improving that. And that's when his vision improvement started to improve.
Oh, Dave.
Yeah.
Dave, yeah. Yeah, diet. I kind of try to stay away from diet because it's like a religious topic to people. Like people get really, you know, like if you're into plant-based and people start talking about carnivore, like they get really upset, and vice versa. It's like it's weird that that's a thing, right? Like, why do we care? Like, as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking it's fantastic that you're experimenting with something and that it's showing an interesting result. That doesn't mean it's for everybody, and it doesn't mean necessarily that that's how you'd want to eat forever. I don't know either way.
Yeah.
But the fact that the reactions are so strong, because in my mind, I'm already imagining the commentary on this from the camps, right? Like there's camps.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Like, I've read some of the different ones, the vegan camp. Like a couple of years ago, I would say I was pretty like staunch vegan, and like it's this mindset that you get into with these different dietary things that you kind of have this animosity towards anyone who's not doing what you're doing. So,
I don't know why. I honestly don't know why. Because I've done the plant-based thing. I don't call it vegan anymore because the vegan seems to be the religious camp, and it was a great experience. It seems like taking a break from whatever I was eating before was great. Like, it felt fantastic. It was awesome. And eventually came the time where that was no longer practical, and I've tried the carnivore-ish thing, and that was also fascinating. Whatever it is, I don't know if it's a specifically different diet or if it's the change in diet, and I'm not ambitious enough to figure out right what ultimately it is. But it's a good experiment. And if somebody's watching or listening to this, I think the takeaway really is there's no downside in having a little bit of an experiment outside of just what we talk about on Endmyopia, and seeing, because diet obviously plays a huge role in trying to see whether a even just temporary change in diet yields some kind of change in your eyesight.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And getting people started, even in our forum. Like, some of the biggest conversation threads are not at all about eyesight. They're about diet stuff.
Yeah.
People get really excited about that. I don't know why. But it's cool. I appreciate it. I think this is an interesting starting point for people who especially are dealing with astigmatism. And I kind of like that you just touched on the diet thing in the end, because Dave brought it up, right? Like, Dave talked a lot in his episode about how he reduced his blood sugar, and that really jump-started his vision improvement. So something worth investigating. I appreciate it. Thanks for being on. That was, even though we struggled with some of the defining, and that's my fault.
Yeah. Apologies. I'm not really the best person on camera.
Oh, well, I'm not, neither am I, so that's all good. Cool, man. I appreciate it. Thanks so much. All right. So that was Aaron. I think realistic expectations there. I like that we talk low light is always a challenge. Once you have no more symptoms of astigmatism in low light, you really made it past that. Absolutely starts with good daylight, right? Like, when you first start reducing in good daylight is a challenge, and eventually the challenge just migrates to it only exists in low light, and then eventually you're rid of it. Hope you liked this episode. If you did, let me know in the comments. If you're wondering why I'm wearing these glasses, no, they're not minus glasses. They're not minus glasses. We'll talk about this soon. We'll talk about this in another episode. See you in the next one.
Meow, 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 meow. Meow.